The evening came gently over the little house at the edge of the village, not all at once, but slowly, like a soft blanket being drawn across the world. The last light of the sun rested on the garden fence, on the quiet path, and on the tops of the apple trees, turning everything a warm shade of gold. Inside the house, the rooms were filled with the peaceful sounds of an ordinary family evening. A kettle whispered on the stove. A spoon touched the side of a bowl. A child's small footsteps moved across the wooden floor, then slowed near the doorway. Somewhere near the window, an old clock marked the hour with a gentle tick, steady and patient, as though it too had learned the calm rhythm of home. In the sitting room, Grandmother Elise rested in her favourite chair, the one with the faded cushion and the soft knitted blanket folded over one arm. Her silver hair was pinned loosely at the back of her head, and her hands rested quietly in her lap. They were gentle hands, shaped by many years of work, prayer, cooking, mending, holding, giving, and blessing. They were not hurried hands anymore. They moved slowly now, with care and tenderness, as though every small task still mattered. Beside her chair was a little table with a worn Bible, a pair of reading glasses, and a small cup of warm tea that sent up a thin curl of steam. Grandmother Elise was not a loud person. She did not fill the house with many instructions or long speeches, but her presence made the house feel steadier. When she was in the room, the children seemed to speak more softly. The grown-ups seemed to breathe more deeply. Even the evening itself seemed to slow down around her. She had a way of looking at simple things with gratitude, as if a loaf of bread, a candle flame, a clean blanket, or a child's sleepy smile were each a small gift placed carefully into her hands by God. The family had gathered after a long Sunday plat. The morning had been spent at church, where hymns had risen gently beneath the wooden beams and sunlight had fallen through the clear windows. The afternoon had passed quietly, with small chores, warm bread, and a walk through the garden while the air was still mild. Now the day was settling into night. The house smelled faintly of baked apples, cinnamon, and fresh linen. A lamp glowed near the window, casting a soft circle of light across the floor. Outside, the sky was turning lavender, and the first evening star was beginning to appear above the dark line of trees. Grandmother Elise watched the family with a peaceful heart. Her daughter moved in the kitchen, putting away the last cups from supper. Her son-in-law stacked a few pieces of wood beside the hearth for the cool night ahead. The children, still carrying the last little sparks of energy from the day, moved between the kitchen and the sitting room, sometimes whispering, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes forgetting to whisper at all. Grandmother smiled at them, not with impatience, but with affection. She had watched children grow before. She knew that childhood was made of questions, crumbs, running feet, sudden tiredness, and the deep need to be loved without hurry. The youngest child, Lily, came into the room holding a small cloth doll by one arm. Her hair was slightly untidy from the day, and her eyes were beginning to grow sleepy, though she was not yet ready to admit it. She paused near the doorway and looked toward her grandmother's chair. Grandmother Elise noticed her and opened one hand in invitation. Lily crossed the room slowly and leaned against the side of the chair, resting her cheek against the soft blanket. "Are you tired, little one?" Grandmother asked gently. Lily shook her head, but her yawn answered for her. Grandmother's smile grew warmer. She reached out and smoothed a loose strand of hair away from the child's face. The touch was light, familiar, and full of love. The fire in the hearth burned low, not bright and crackling as it had earlier, but soft and steady. Its glow touched the walls and made the room feel safe. Shadows rested in the corners, but they were gentle shadows, softened by lamplight and the warmth of family. The little house did not have many fine things, but it had peace. It had a table where prayers were spoken before meals. It had windows that opened toward the garden, It had blankets folded for chilly evenings. It had hands willing to help, voices willing to forgive, and hearts learning, day by day, to trust the Lord in simple ways. Grandmother Elise picked up her tea and held the cup between both hands. She did not drink right away. She simply enjoyed the warmth. For many years, she had believed that God's care often came quietly. It came in daily bread. It came in a roof that kept out the rain. It came in the strength to finish a task. It came in an apology spoken softly after a hard moment. It came in the chance to begin again in the morning. It came in the laughter of children, the patience of parents, the stillness of evening, and the comfort of prayer before sleep. As the house grew quieter, Lily climbed carefully onto the small footstool beside her grandmother's chair. She hugged her doll close and looked up with the serious expression children sometimes have when a question has been growing inside them for a while. "Grandmother," she asked softly, "why do you always say thank you to God, even for little things?" The question floated into the warm room and rested there. Grandmother Elise looked down at Lily with tenderness. She did not answer quickly. She let the question breathe. Outside, a breeze moved through the apple trees. Inside, the clock kept ticking gently. The kettle had gone quiet, and from the kitchen came only the soft sound of dishes being dried. At last, Grandmother placed her cup on the table and folded her hands loosely over the blanket. "Because, my dear," she said in a voice as calm as evening light, "most of life is made of little things, and when we learn to notice them, we begin to see how kindly God has been caring for us all along." Lily listened closely. She did not understand everything, but she understood the softness in her grandmother's voice. She understood that this was the beginning of a story. Grandmother Elise looked toward the window, where the last gold of day had nearly faded. The garden was growing dim now. The apple trees stood quietly. Electrum, the path to the gate, was silvered with evening light. She thought of all the days she had lived, the easy ones and the difficult ones, the bright mornings and the weary nights, the answered prayers and the prayers that had taught her to wait. Through them all, she had learned that faith did not always feel like something grand. Sometimes faith was simply whispering "thank you" while slicing bread. Sometimes it was waiting patiently for rain. Sometimes it was trusting God's goodness while folding a child's blanket at night. She turned back to Lily and touched her small hand. "Would you like to hear about some of those little things?" Grandmother asked. Lily nodded and leaned closer. Around them, the house settled into a deeper quiet. The family moved more slowly now. The lamp glowed softly. The fire rested low in the hearth. The evening star shone beyond the window. And in that warm little room, with the day ending gently and the night arriving in peace, Grandmother Elise began to share the quiet stories of a faith shaped by gratitude, patience, and the tender care of God. The children settled close to Grandmother Ruth's chair as the evening grew softer around them. The youngest child, Lily, tucked her little feet beneath the blanket and leaned against the side of the rocking chair, close enough to feel the warmth of Grandmother's skirt. Her older brother, Samuel, sat on the rug near the hearth, his knees drawn up, his chin resting on his arms. The fire had lowered to a gentle glow, and the room was filled with that quiet, golden light that makes everything seem tender. The table had been cleared. The bowls were washed. The scent of apples still lingered in the air, mingling with cinnamon, warm bread, and the faint trace of wood smoke. Grandmother Ruth did not begin speaking right away. She knew that stories, especially bedtime stories, should not be rushed into the room. They should arrive slowly, like evening light slipping across the floor. She rocked once, then again, the chair making its soft, familiar sound. Lily listened to that sound with sleepy eyes, for she had heard it since she was very small. To her, the creak of Grandmother's rocking chair meant safety. It meant warm blankets, kind hands, quiet prayers, and stories that made the heart feel calm. Samuel looked up at Grandmother Ruth and asked in a gentle voice, "Grandmother, why do you always seem peaceful?" The question floated into the room quietly. It was not asked with worry, only with the honest wonder of a child who had been watching. Grandmother Ruth lowered her eyes to him and smiled. She did not answer too quickly. Outside the window, the sky was now deep blue, and the first stars shone faintly above the garden. Inside, the lamp glowed softly on the wooden table, and the family moved quietly in the kitchen, speaking in low voices so the children could listen. "Well," Grandmother Ruth said at last, "I do not always feel peaceful every moment. No one does, dear one. But I have learned where to bring my heart when it is tired." Samuel thought about this. Lily looked up too, her eyes wide and soft. "Where do you bring it?" she asked. Grandmother Ruth reached down and gently brushed a strand of hair away from Lily's forehead. "I bring it to the Lord," she said, "sometimes with words and sometimes with only a quiet breath. Sometimes I say a prayer, and sometimes I simply sit still and remember that He is near." The children were quiet. This answer seemed simple, but it also felt large, like a window opening into a sky they could not yet see all the way across. Samuel looked toward the little cross on the wall, the one worn smooth at the edges. He had seen Grandmother touch it many times when she passed by, not in a hurried way, but gently, as though remembering a dear friend. "Does God hear very small prayers?" Samuel asked. Grandmother Ruth's smile deepened. "Yes," she said. "He hears the small prayers. He hears the prayers whispered at the table, and the prayers said beside the bed. He hears the prayers that are only one sentence long. He even understands the prayers we cannot find words for." Lily's fingers played with the edge of the blanket. What if someone forgets to pray? Then God still loves them. Grandmother Ruth answered softly, "Prayer is not a way of making God kind. He is already kind. Prayer is one of the ways we remember His kindness." That made Lily feel peaceful, though she did not fully know why. She leaned her cheek against the rocking chair and looked into the fire. The small coals glowed red and gold, shifting slowly beneath the grey ash. The room felt very safe, the kind of safe that made questions come easily. "Grandmother," Samuel said after a while, "were you peaceful when you were little?" Grandmother Ruth gave a quiet laugh, the kind that sounded like warm tea being poured. "Not always," she said. "When I was little, I worried about many things. I worried when the wind was strong. I worried when the garden did not grow quickly. I worried when I made mistakes. I worried when my mother was tired. But my own grandmother used to tell me that the Lord was patient with growing hearts, just as He is patient with growing seeds." Samuel tilted his head. "Growing hearts?" "Yes," Grandmother Ruth said. "A heart grows slowly. Faith grows slowly. Gratitude grows slowly, Ita. Patience grows slowly. We do not wake up one morning knowing everything. We learn, day by day, with God's help." Lily liked the sound of that. It made faith seem less like something a person had to climb toward, and more like something that grew quietly in warm soil. She imagined a little seed inside her heart, small and hidden, being watered by prayers, kindness, songs, and Sunday mornings. Grandmother Ruth reached for the knitted blanket folded over the arm of her chair and laid it gently across Lily's shoulders. "When I was a girl," she continued, "I used to sit beside my grandmother's chair just as you are sitting beside mine. Her hands were always busy. She mended socks, folded cloth, peeled apples, or held her Bible. And while she worked, she told me stories. Not loud stories, not frightening stories, just simple ones. Stories about bread, rain, gardens, neighbors, and how the Lord cared for people in the middle of ordinary days." Samuel shifted closer. "Tell us one." "I will," Grandmother Ruth said. "But first, Let me tell you something important. Many people think blessings must be large to be noticed. They think a blessing must arrive with a great sound, like thunder or church bells. But many blessings come quietly. They come like a warm bowl of soup, like clean sheets after a long day, like a bird singing in the morning, like someone forgiving you gently, like a hand holding yours when you are tired. The room grew quieter as she spoke. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to soften. Lily's mother, standing near the sink, paused for a moment and listened, her hands resting on a folded towel. Grandmother Ruth's words were meant for the children, but they rested over the whole family. Samuel looked down at his hands. "Is today a blessing?" he asked. "Yes," Grandmother Ruth replied. "Today is a blessing. This evening is a blessing. This house, this fire, this food, this family, only, this quiet hour. Each one is a gift." Lily smiled sleepily. "And apples?" Grandmother Ruth laughed softly. "Yes, little one, apples too." From the kitchen, Lily's father smiled as he covered the cooling apples with a cloth. The house seemed to grow warmer with the gentle laughter. No one laughed loudly. It was only a small family laugh, soft enough to belong to evening. Grandmother Ruth looked from one child to the other. "Gratitude helps us notice what God has already placed near us," she said. "It does not mean every day feels easy. It does not mean we pretend we are never tired or never sad. It simply means we open our eyes to the little mercies that help us keep going." Electro. Samuel was quiet for a while. Then he asked, "What is mercy?" Grandmother Ruth folded her hands over her knitting and thought of how to answer in words a child could carry into sleep. "Mercy," she said slowly, "is kindness we do not have to earn. It is love reaching toward us when we need help. It is God being gentle with us, even when our steps are small." Lily whispered, "Like when I spilled the milk and Mama didn't get angry." Her mother smiled from the kitchen. "Yes," Grandmother Ruth said, "like that. Your mother helped you clean it, and then she kissed your forehead. That was mercy in a little kitchen moment." Lily seemed pleased by this. She had worried that spilling the milk had spoiled the morning, but now it became part of a softer story. Samuel looked into the fire again, thinking, he was old enough to understand that grown-ups sometimes carried concerns, but young enough to hope every concern could be wrapped in a blanket and made gentle. "Grandmother," he said, "when you are worried, what do you do first?" Grandmother Ruth looked toward the window. The garden outside was dim now, only the shapes of the herbs and flowers visible in the night. "Sometimes," she said, "I place my hand over my heart and take a slow breath. Then I say, 'Lord, you are here.' I do not always feel better immediately, but I remember that I am not alone, and that helps my heart become quiet." Samuel copied her without thinking. He placed one hand over his chest and took a slow breath. Lily did the same, though her breath came out in a tiny sigh. Grandmother Ruth watched them tenderly. "That is a good prayer too," she said. "A breath can become a prayer when it helps us remember God." For a little while, no one spoke. The old clock ticked on the shelf. The fire shifted softly. A tree branch brushed against the window with a light tapping sound. The house felt as though it had gathered around Grandmother's words and was holding them carefully. Then Lily asked, "Does God take care of us when we sleep?" "Yes," Grandmother Ruth said. "He watches over us in the night, Hetta. Sleep is one of his gentle gifts. We do not have to stay awake to keep the world safe. We are allowed to rest." This answer was especially comforting to Lily, who had often tried to keep her eyes open as long as possible, as though sleep might make her miss something important. Now she imagined sleep as a gift wrapped in moonlight, placed softly beside her bed by a loving God. Samuel looked at Grandmother's hands. "Were your hands always wrinkled?" he asked suddenly. His mother made a soft sound from the kitchen, half laughter and half surprise, but Grandmother Ruth only smiled. "No, dear one," she said. "Once they were small like yours, then they grew. They worked. They held babies. They planted seeds. They washed dishes. They folded blankets. They waved goodbye. They wiped tears. They opened the Bible. They learned to pray. Samuel looked at his own hands, turning them over in the firelight. "Will my hands do all that?" "Some of it," Grandmother Ruth said, "and other things too. God will give your hands their own work to do. Kind work, I hope. Helpful work. Gentle work." Lily lifted one hand from beneath the blanket. "Mine too?" "Yours too," Grandmother Ruth said, taking the little hand between her own. "Your hands can share, comfort, build, plant, draw, carry, and pray. Small hands can do kind things." Lily looked very serious for a moment, as though receiving an important responsibility. Then her eyes softened again, and she nestled closer to the chair. Grandmother Ruth could feel the children growing calmer. Their questions were slowing. Their bodies were resting. This was often how bedtime came in the house, not suddenly, but through warm food, low light, gentle words, and the feeling of being loved. She knew there was no need to give them more than they could hold. Children did not need heavy lessons before sleep. They needed simple truths wrapped in tenderness. They needed to hear that God was good, that they were loved, that tomorrow could wait, and that tonight was safe. She reached for the cup of warm milk on the table beside her and took a small sip. Then she set it down and said, "Would you like to hear about the time my grandmother taught me to thank God for rain?" Samuel nodded. Lily nodded too, though her eyelids were beginning to lower. Grandmother Ruth leaned back in her rocking chair, and the soft creak began again. The firelight moved gently over her face, showing the lines made by many years of smiling, caring, waiting, and trusting. Her voice, when she spoke again, was low and warm. "It happened when I was about your age," she began. "I had wanted sunshine that day. I wanted to run outside. I wanted to pick flowers and play near the garden fence. But the rain came instead, quiet and steady, covering the roof and making little rivers along the path. I remember feeling disappointed. I thought the day had been spoiled, but my grandmother only smiled and said, 'Ruth, sometimes the Lord waters blessings before we can see them grow.'" The children listened. The words seemed to enter the room like another kind of light. "And that," Grandmother Ruth said, "was one of the first times I learned that God's care does not always look the way we expect. Sometimes it looks like sunshine. Sometimes it looks like rain. Sometimes it looks like waiting. Sometimes it looks like a quiet evening at home, when nothing much happens, but the heart becomes peaceful." Lily's head rested fully now against the chair. Samuel's eyes were soft and thoughtful. Grandmother Ruth looked down at them and felt a deep tenderness. She knew that they would not remember every word. They might not remember the exact way the fire looked, or the smell of apples in the kitchen, or the questions they had asked. But she hoped they would remember the feeling of being safe beside her chair, the feeling of hearing that God was kind, the feeling of a peaceful evening when faith was not explained in difficult words, but shown through warmth, patience, gratitude, and love. Outside, night settled gently over the garden. Inside, the house rested in lamplight, and beside Grandmother Ruth's chair, two children listened as her gentle faith opened like a quiet story, leading them slowly toward rest. Grandmother Ruth rested her hands gently in her lap, and the old rocking chair moved beneath her with a slow, familiar rhythm. The room had grown even quieter now. The fire in the hearth was no longer bright and lively, but low and warm, giving just enough light to make the children's faces glow softly. Lily was tucked under the knitted blanket, her cheek resting against the side of Grandmother's chair. Samuel sat with his legs crossed on the rug, his eyes fixed on the fire, as if the coals themselves were listening too. In the kitchen, their mother moved quietly, covering the last dish, folding a towel, and lowering the lamp near the sink. Their father stepped softly across the room and placed another small piece of wood near the hearth, not to make the fire strong again, but only to keep the warmth through the next little while. Grandmother Ruth looked at the children and smiled. "You asked me why I thank God for small things," she said softly. "So tonight, I will tell you about 3 simple gifts I learned to notice when I was young. Bread, rain, and the blessings that come quietly in the middle of an ordinary day." Lily whispered, "Like apples?" Grandmother Ruth gave a small laugh. "Yes, little one, apples too, but we will begin with bread." Samuel shifted closer, and Grandmother Ruth's eyes grew thoughtful, as though she were looking past the walls of the room and back into a morning from many years before. "When I was a girl," she began, "my family lived in a small farmhouse not far from a hill covered with wild grass. Our house was smaller than this one, and in winter the wind found every little crack around the windows. We did not have many fine things, but we had a table, a hearth, a garden, and a mother who knew how to make a loaf of bread feed more people than anyone thought possible." The children listened quietly. Grandmother Ruth's voice was gentle, unhurried, and warm. Every Saturday morning, my mother would rise early to bake. I would wake to the sound of her moving through the kitchen before the sun had fully lifted over the fields. I can still remember the smell of flour, yeast, warm water, and wood smoke. The whole house would slowly fill with that scent, and even if the morning was cold, even if frost had silvered the grass outside, the kitchen felt like a place of comfort. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering. My mother's hands were strong from work, but gentle with dough. She would press it, fold it, turn it, and let it rest. Then she would cover it with a clean cloth and set it near the warmth of the hearth. I used to ask her why the bread needed to wait. I wanted it ready right away. I wanted to eat it while the morning was still new. But she would smile and say, "Ruth, good things often need quiet time to rise." Samuel looked up. "Like patience?" "Yes," Grandmother Ruth said. "Exactly like patience. Bread taught me that not everything good can be rushed. Some things grow in silence. Some things become ready while we are doing other small tasks. We cannot pull bread upward and make it rise faster. We can only prepare it, cover it, keep it warm, and wait." Lily's eyes were half closed, but she was still listening. "Did you eat it with butter?" "When we had butter," Grandmother Ruth replied, smiling. "And when we did not, we ate it plain, and it was still a blessing." One morning, I remember standing beside the table, waiting for my mother to cut the first loaf. The crust crackled under the knife, and steam rose from the inside. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My mother gave me a slice, and I held it in both hands because it was too warm to hold in one. Then, before I took a bite, she said, "First, we give thanks." Grandmother Ruth looked toward the table in the room where the family had eaten supper not long before. At that age, I did not understand much about gratitude. I thought giving thanks was something we did because grown-ups told us to. But my mother's prayer was so simple. She said, "Lord, thank you for bread enough today. Not bread enough for every day of our lives, not bread enough to fill the shelves forever, just bread enough today." Samuel was quiet. The room seemed to hold that sentence carefully. Later, Grandmother Ruth continued, I understood. My mother was teaching me to receive the day's gift without demanding tomorrow's answer. She was teaching me that God's care often comes one day at a time. Bread enough today, strength enough today, light enough today, grace enough today. We do not always see the whole path ahead, but we are given what we need for the step we are standing on. Lily's small fingers curled around the blanket. Did you ever share the bread? Oh yes, Grandmother Ruth said, many times. And one Saturday, I learned that bread becomes even sweeter when it is shared. A neighbor came to our door near evening. She was tired, and her children were hungry. My mother had only 2 loaves cooling on the table, and I remember feeling worried when she wrapped one in a cloth and gave it away. I thought, but then we will have less. My mother saw my face after the neighbor left, and she sat beside me. "What did she say?" Samuel asked. "She said, 'Ruth, when God places bread in our hands, He may also be showing us someone who needs a piece of it.' I did not fully understand then, but that night, when we ate the one loaf that remained, it tasted different to me. It tasted like kindness. It tasted like trust. And we had enough." Grandmother Ruth let the words settle. The fire shifted softly, and the room glowed with a tender stillness. "Now," she said after a while, "let me tell you about rain." Lily smiled sleepily. "The rain that waters blessings?" "Yes," Grandmother Ruth said. "The very same." She looked toward the window, where the night outside lay calm and dark. "When I was young, I loved sunny days. I loved running barefoot in the grass, picking flowers, chasing butterflies, and watching clouds move slowly across the sky. But I did not love rain. Rain meant staying inside. Rain meant muddy paths. Rain meant no running through the fields. One day, I had waited all week to visit a friend who lived beyond the hill. I had planned it carefully in my child's heart. I would wear my blue ribbon. I would carry a little basket. We would sit under the apple tree and pretend the fallen petals were snow. But when morning came, the sky was grey, and rain began tapping on the roof. Samuel smiled a little. "Were you upset?" "I was very upset," Grandmother Ruth admitted gently. I sat by the window with my arms folded, feeling as though the whole day had been ruined. My grandmother was visiting us then. She was sitting near the hearth, peeling apples with slow hands. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "Ruth, come here." I went, though not very cheerfully. She patted the chair beside her and asked me to listen. Grandmother Ruth's voice became softer. At first, I heard only rain, drop after drop on the roof, rain running down the window, rain dripping from the eaves, rain tapping the stones outside the door. Then my grandmother asked, "What else do you hear?" I listened again. I heard the kettle beginning to sing. I heard the fire crackling. I heard my mother humming in the kitchen. I heard the old clock ticking. I heard my own breathing become slower. Lily closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening too. My grandmother said, "Rain changes the shape of a day, but it does not take away God's goodness from the day." Then she told me to look at the garden. The soil was drinking. The beans were lifting their leaves. The flowers were bending beneath the drops, not angry, not afraid, simply receiving what they needed. "You wanted sunshine today," she told me, "but the garden needed rain. And sometimes the Lord is caring for things we have not thought to ask about." Samuel looked thoughtful. "So rain can be a blessing even when you do not want it?" "Yes," Grandmother Ruth said. "Not every disappointment is easy, and we do not have to pretend we like every change of plan. But sometimes, in a quiet way, God helps us notice that His care is still present." That rainy day became one of my favorite memories. I did not go to my friend's house. I did not sit beneath the apple tree. Instead, I sat beside my grandmother. We peeled apples. We baked them with cinnamon. She told me stories, and by evening, I no longer felt that the day had been spoiled. It had simply become a different kind of gift. The children were very still now. Their father sat quietly in a chair near the kitchen doorway, listening with a soft expression. Their mother had finished her work and stood with one hand resting on the back of a chair. Grandmother Ruth's stories had gathered the whole house into a gentle hush. "And now," Grandmother Ruth said, "let me tell you about daily blessings. These are the easiest to miss, because they are often the smallest." Samuel looked at her hands, folded calmly in the lamplight. "How do you notice them?" Grandmother Ruth smiled. "By slowing down. by asking God to help your eyes become gentle, by remembering that not every gift shines brightly at first. Some blessings are quiet, some are hidden inside work, some come through people, some come through waiting, some are as small as a cup of water when you are thirsty. She looked down at Lily, whose breathing had become slower under the blanket. When I was a young mother, Grandmother Ruth continued, there were days when I was very tired. The house needed sweeping, the children needed care, the garden needed attention, meals had to be prepared, clothes had to be washed, and sometimes I felt as though one day simply turned into another. I loved my family dearly, but love does not always mean the body is not tired. Samuel nodded solemnly, as though he understood more than he could say. One evening, Grandmother Ruth said, after a long day, I sat at the table after everyone had gone to bed. The lamp was low, my hands were sore, there were crumbs on the floor, dishes drying by the sink, and a basket of laundry waiting for morning. I remember feeling discouraged, not frightened, not hopeless, just tired in my spirit. I wondered if anything I had done that day mattered. The room seemed to draw closer around her words. Then I noticed something. On the table, beside the lamp, was a little wildflower in a cup. One of my children had picked it and brought it to me that afternoon. I had been busy when it was given, and I had almost forgotten it. But there it was, still standing in water, its tiny petals open. I looked at that flower, and I felt my heart soften. I began to remember the day differently. Yes, there had been work. Yes, there had been tiredness, but there had also been a child's gift. There had been sunlight on the floor. There had been laughter when flour spilled on someone's nose. There had been warm soup. There had been a quiet prayer before supper. There had been enough. Grandmother Ruth's eyes shone gently in the firelight. That night, I learned to look for the little mercies that sit quietly on the table after a long day. Sometimes gratitude does not change the whole day at once. Sometimes it simply lights one small candle inside it. Samuel whispered, "What did you pray?" I said, "Lord, thank you for the flower. Thank you for the day, even the tired parts. Help me see your kindness tomorrow." And then I went to bed. I slept peacefully, not because all the work was finished, but because I remembered I was not carrying the day alone. The house was very still. Outside, the night had deepened fully. The garden was dark beyond the window, but the room remained warm with lamplight and firelight. Grandmother Ruth looked at the children and spoke even more gently. "Dear ones, when you grow older, you will have many kinds of days. Some will be bright and easy, some will be rainy, some will ask you to wait, some will give you more work than you expected. But in every kind of day, you can ask the Lord to help you notice one blessing, just one, a kind word, a safe home, a warm meal, a soft bed, a bird outside the window, a hand to hold, a chance to say sorry, a chance to forgive. These are not small to God." Lily's eyes were nearly closed now. "Grandmother," she murmured, "is this blanket a blessing?" Grandmother Ruth touched the blanket tenderly. "Yes, Lily, this blanket is a blessing." "Is the fire a blessing?" "Yes." "Is your story a blessing?" Grandmother Ruth's smile became very soft. "I hope so." Samuel looked into the hearth and asked, "Can we thank God for today before bed?" "Yes," Grandmother Ruth said, "we can thank Him now, very simply." The children lowered their heads, and the family in the room grew still. Grandmother Ruth did not make the prayer long. She knew little hearts were tired and ready for sleep. In a quiet voice, she said, "Dear Lord, thank you for bread, for rain, and for the blessings you place in ordinary days. Thank you for this warm house, for this family, and for the peace of this evening. Help us notice your kindness, and help our hearts rest in your care. Amen." "Amen," Samuel whispered. Amen, Lily breathed, so softly it was almost part of a yawn. Grandmother Ruth leaned back in her chair. The stories had done their gentle work. The children were calmer now, their questions softened into sleepy thoughts. The fire was low, the lamp was warm. The house seemed to rest with them. For a while, no one moved. The family simply stayed together in the quiet. The father placed one hand on the back of the mother's chair. The mother smiled tiredly but peacefully. Samuel leaned against the rug pillow, his eyes heavy. Lily's hand slipped from the blanket and rested open beside Grandmother Ruth's chair. Grandmother Ruth looked around the room and felt gratitude rise in her again. Bread enough today, rain for the garden, a flower on the table, a blanket over a child, a family safe at evening. She knew that years from now, the children might not remember every detail of what she had said. They might forget the exact stories of bread and rain. They might forget the words of the little prayer. But perhaps, somewhere deep in their hearts, they would remember the feeling of this night, the feeling of being gathered close, the feeling of hearing that God's care could be found in ordinary things, the feeling of gentle faith, warm as firelight, steady as a grandmother's hand. And outside, beneath the quiet sky, the little house rested peacefully at the end of the day, held in the same loving care that had given bread, sent rain, and filled the simplest moments with grace. After the prayer, the house remained quiet for a long and gentle moment. No one seemed eager to break the silence. The fire had settled into a soft red glow. The lamp on the table burned low and golden, and the sweet scent of baked apples still rested in the warm air. Lily was nearly asleep beside Grandmother Ruth's chair, wrapped in the knitted blanket like a little bundle of peace. Samuel, though still awake, had grown very still. His eyes were thoughtful as he looked toward the dark window, where the garden waited outside beneath the evening sky. Grandmother Ruth followed his gaze and smiled softly. She knew that look. It was the look of a child holding a question quietly, not yet sure how to ask it. She let the rocking chair move once, then again, slow and steady, until Samuel finally turned back to her. "Grandmother," he said in a small voice, "is waiting hard for grown-ups too." The question was simple, but it touched something deep and tender. Grandmother Ruth looked down at her hands, folded over the knitting in her lap. Those hands had waited through many seasons. They had waited for bread to rise, for letters to arrive, for storms to pass, for children to grow, for prayers to be answered, and sometimes for peace to return slowly after a difficult day. She smiled, not because waiting was easy, but because she understood it well. "Yes, Samuel," she said gently. "Waiting can be hard for grown-ups too. Sometimes it is hard for everyone." Samuel seemed relieved by this answer. "I thought maybe grown-ups were better at it." Grandmother Ruth gave a soft laugh. "Some grown-ups only look better at it because they have had more practice. But patience is not something we learn all at once. It grows little by little." "Like bread?" Lily murmured sleepily without opening her eyes. "Yes, little one," Grandmother Ruth said, touching the blanket near Lily's shoulder. "Like bread, and also like a garden." At the word garden, Samuel sat a little straighter. He loved the garden behind the house, especially in spring and summer. It was not large, but to him it felt full of small wonders. There were rows of herbs, a patch of carrots, climbing beans, lavender near the fence, and a corner where Grandmother Ruth let the children plant flowers of their own choosing. Sometimes they planted too many seeds too close together. Sometimes they watered too much. Sometimes they forgot where they had put things and were surprised when green shoots appeared in unexpected places. Grandmother never scolded them harshly. She only smiled and said that gardens were patient teachers. "Do you remember," Grandmother Ruth asked, "when we planted the bean seeds last spring?" Samuel nodded. "I checked them every morning." "You checked them more than every morning," his mother said softly from near the kitchen doorway, smiling. Samuel looked a little embarrassed. I wanted to see if they were growing. Grandmother Ruth's eyes twinkled kindly. And do you remember what happened on the second day? Samuel looked down at the rug. Nothing. And on the third day? Nothing. And on the fourth? Still nothing, he said. Grandmother Ruth nodded. You came to me with a very serious face and told me the seeds were broken. His father laughed quietly, not loudly enough to disturb the calm of the room. Samuel smiled too, remembering himself kneeling in the garden, worried that the little brown seeds had failed him. But they were not broken, Grandmother Ruth continued. They were hidden. They were doing quiet work under the soil where you could not see them. Samuel looked toward the window again, as though he could see through the darkness and into the sleeping garden. Grandmother Ruth leaned back gently in her chair and let the memory unfold in her voice. That morning, I took you outside, she said. The sun was warm, but the ground was still cool from the night. You knelt beside the row of beans and pressed your little hands into the soil. You wanted to dig them up to see what was happening. Do you remember what I told you? Samuel nodded slowly. You said if I kept digging them up, they would not have time to grow. That is right, Grandmother Ruth said. Some things must be trusted while they are hidden. A seed needs darkness for a while. It needs soil around it. It needs water, warmth, and time. If we keep disturbing it because we are impatient, we may harm the very thing we are hoping for. The room grew still around those words. Lily breathed softly beneath the blanket. The clock ticked on the shelf. The low fire shifted with a tiny sound. Grandmother Ruth continued, Faith can be like that too. Sometimes God is caring for things in us that we cannot see yet. Sometimes He is growing patience, kindness, courage, forgiveness, or peace deep inside the heart. At first, it may look like nothing is happening, but hidden does not mean forgotten. Samuel listened carefully. So when we wait, God might still be working? Yes, Grandmother Ruth said. Very often. Not always in the way we expect, and not always as quickly as we wish. But God is gentle with growing things. She looked down at Lily, who was now half asleep, and softened her voice even more. A garden never becomes beautiful in one day. First there is soil, then there are seeds, then there is waiting. Then one morning, a tiny green shoot appears, so small you might miss it if you walk too quickly. After that, there is more waiting. Leaves open, stems grow stronger, buds form, and only after much quiet time does the flower bloom or the fruit ripen. Samuel whispered, I like the first little shoots. So do I, Grandmother Ruth said. They remind me that beginnings can be very small and still be full of hope. She let the rocking chair move again, slowly and gently. The house seemed to breathe with it. When I was younger, she said, I used to think patience meant only sitting still and waiting for something to happen. But over the years, the Lord taught me that patience is often active in quiet ways. A gardener waits, yes, but she also waters. She pulls weeds. She protects tender plants from cold. She watches the sky. She learns when to work and when to leave things alone. Patience is not doing nothing. Patience is caring gently while trusting God with the growth. Samuel thought about this for a while. Is that why you water the garden even when there are no vegetables yet? Yes, Grandmother Ruth said, because I trust that something is growing, even before I can place it in a basket. His mother, who had been listening quietly, came into the sitting room and sat in the chair near the table. Her face was tired from the day, but peaceful. Your grandmother told me something like that when you were very small, she said to Samuel. Samuel looked at his mother with interest. What did she say? His mother smiled softly. You were learning to walk, and I was worried because you fell so many times. I wanted to help you too much. I wanted to hold both your hands every moment so you would never stumble. But Grandmother Ruth told me, let him grow slowly. A child learns balance through many small tries. Samuel looked surprised. I fell a lot? Very much. his father said gently from the doorway. Grandmother Ruth smiled, but each little try mattered. Each step, even the wobbly ones, was part of learning. And now you walk without thinking about it. Samuel looked down at his feet, as though they had performed some great miracle without telling him. Grandmother Ruth said, "Many things in life are learned that way, slowly, with practice, with kindness, with room to try again. That is why we must be patient with others, and also with ourselves." The words rested gently over the room. Samuel did not answer right away. He had made mistakes that week, small ones that had felt large to him. He had spoken sharply to Lily when she touched one of his drawings. He had grown frustrated when his wooden toy would not fit together properly. He had complained when asked to help carry kindling. None of these things had ruined the week, but he remembered them now with a little heaviness. Grandmother Ruth seemed to understand without being told. "Samuel," she said gently, "do you know what gardeners do when weeds appear?" He nodded. "They pull them out." "Yes, but a wise gardener does not throw away the whole garden because a weed has grown in it. She tends the garden. She removes what should not stay. She gives the good plants room to grow." Samuel looked at her. "Our hearts are like that too," she said. "When impatience, unkind words, or selfishness appear, we do not need to despair. We bring those things to the Lord. We say we are sorry. We receive His forgiveness. Then, with His help, we make room for something better to grow." Samuel's face softened. "Like kindness?" "Yes," Grandmother Ruth said. "Like kindness, like gentleness, like patience, like gratitude." Lily, still with her eyes closed, whispered, "Like flowers." Grandmother Ruth smiled. "Yes, Lily, like flowers." The family sat together in the warm quiet. The lesson did not feel heavy. It did not make the children afraid. It felt like the garden itself, soft soil, moonlit leaves, small shoots growing slowly in hidden places. Grandmother Ruth continued, "There was one summer, many years ago, when I wanted a rose bush to bloom by the front fence. I had planted it carefully. I watered it. I cleared the weeds around it. I checked it every day. But for a long time, there were only leaves, no roses. I thought perhaps I had done something wrong. I thought perhaps it would never bloom." "What happened?" Samuel asked. "I kept caring for it," she said, "and I waited. One morning, when I had almost stopped expecting anything, I saw one small bud. It was closed tightly, very plain, hardly noticeable. But over the next days it opened little by little, not all at once, not because I told it to hurry. It opened in its own time, and when it finally bloomed, it was more beautiful to me because I had waited for it." Samuel smiled faintly. "Was it red?" "A soft pink," Grandmother Ruth said. "Pale as morning light." Lily sighed happily. Grandmother Ruth's voice lowered into an even more restful rhythm. "That rose taught me something. Sometimes we do not see the fruit of love right away. A kind word may not seem to change anything at first. A prayer may feel very small. A lesson may take a long time to be understood. A child may need to hear the same gentle truth many times before it settles in the heart. But nothing given in love is wasted with God." The mother looked down at her hands. The father's expression grew quiet and tender. The children did not fully understand how deeply those words touched the grown-ups, but they felt the peace in the room deepen. Grandmother Ruth said, "When we are patient, we are not pretending that waiting is always easy. We are simply trusting that God can care for what we cannot hurry. He cares for seeds in the soil. He cares for children as they grow. He cares for tired parents learning day by day. He cares for old hearts remembering long seasons. He cares for prayers that have not yet become clear. And He cares for us tonight, even while we sleep." Outside, a light breeze moved through the garden. The leaves brushed softly against one another. The stars shone above the roof, quiet and steady. The house seemed wrapped in gentleness. Samuel leaned against the leg of Grandmother Ruth's chair. "Grandmother," he said, "will you show me the garden tomorrow?" "If the morning is fair," she said, "we will walk through it together." "And can we look for small things growing?" "Yes," she said. "We will look slowly. That is the best way to see a garden," Lily murmured. "I want to see flowers." "You shall," Grandmother Ruth whispered. "But tonight, the flowers are sleeping too." That made Lily smile with her eyes still closed. She imagined the flowers tucked under leaves, resting in the moonlight, waiting for morning. It made sleep seem easier, as though even the garden knew what to do when night came. Grandmother Ruth reached down and gently touched Samuel's hair. "Dear one," she said, "when you feel impatient, remember the seeds. Remember that much of God's work begins quietly. You do not need to force every good thing to happen at once. You can do the small, faithful thing in front of you, and then rest." Samuel nodded slowly. His eyelids were growing heavier now too. The room became still again. The mother rose quietly to fold one more cloth. The father covered the fire so it would remain safe through the night. Grandmother Ruth's chair rocked slowly, slowly, slowly. No one spoke for a while. There was nothing more that needed to be explained. The story had settled where it needed to settle. In the silence, Grandmother Ruth prayed inwardly for the children. She prayed that they would grow like well-watered plants, not rushed by fear, but strengthened by love. She prayed that their hearts would become kind, patient, thankful, and peaceful. She prayed that when they became older and faced their own seasons of waiting, they would remember this warm room, this quiet fire, this gentle evening, and the simple truth that God was faithful even when growth was hidden. At last, Samuel whispered, "Grandmother?" "Yes, dear. I think I can wait better if I remember that something might be growing." Grandmother Ruth's eyes shone softly. "That is a very good thing to remember." Lily gave a tiny, sleepy nod, though no one was sure if she had heard. The blanket rose and fell with her breathing. The fire glowed low. The garden rested outside. And in the quiet house at the end of the day, patience felt less like a hard lesson and more like a gentle seed placed carefully in the heart, covered with warmth, watered by love, and entrusted to God until morning. The evening moved deeper, and the little house seemed to grow softer with every passing minute. The children were still near Grandmother Ruth's chair, Lily wrapped in the knitted blanket, and Samuel leaning quietly against the rug pillow, both of them held in that gentle space between listening and sleep. The fire had been lowered for the night, but it still gave a mild warmth that reached across the room. The lamp on the table glowed like a small golden moon, and the scent of baked apples, bread, and wood smoke lingered in the air. Outside, the garden slept beneath the stars, but inside, the family remained gathered together for a little while longer, unwilling to hurry away from the peace that had settled over them. Lily's mother, Grace, came from the kitchen carrying a small bowl of baked apples. They had cooled enough now, soft and sweet, with cinnamon resting in their warm syrup. She placed the bowl on the table and set out a few small dishes, moving slowly so the quiet of the room would not be disturbed. Lily's father, Thomas, brought the last cups of warm milk and set them down carefully. He was a gentle man with tired hands and kind eyes, the kind of person who did not speak very much when the day was ending, but whose presence made the room feel steady. He pulled a chair close to the table and sat down with a peaceful sigh. Grandmother Ruth watched them with tender affection. She had seen this table hold many things over the years. It had held meals on busy mornings, baskets of laundry waiting to be folded, children's drawings, letters from relatives far away, jars of jam, bowls of soup, sewing, flower cups, birthday candles, and open Bibles. It had held elbows, laughter, spilled milk, tired heads, folded hands, and quiet prayers. The table was simple and worn, with small marks in the wood from years of use. But to Grandmother Ruth, it was one of the dearest places in the house. It was where the family returned again and again to receive what God had provided. Grace spooned a little baked apple into each dish. The children stirred slowly, drawn by the familiar sweetness. Lily opened her eyes just enough to see the bowl placed near her, and Samuel sat up a little straighter. Grandmother Ruth smiled. "Only a little," Grace whispered, "just enough sweetness before bed." The children nodded solemnly, as though receiving a very important gift. The apples were warm but not hot, soft enough to melt gently on the tongue. The cinnamon made the whole room feel warmer. Before they ate, Thomas folded his hands. The others followed. The prayer was not long, it did not need to be. "Lord," he said quietly, "thank you for this table, for the food you have given, and for the love we share beneath this roof. Thank you for carrying us through another day. Teach us to be grateful, patient, and kind. Amen." The family whispered Amen together, and the simple words seemed to rest over the table like a blessing. They ate slowly. No one rushed. The spoons touched the dishes softly. Lily took a tiny bite and smiled without saying anything. Samuel tasted the apples and looked toward his mother. "They are very good," he said. Grace smiled back. "Your grandmother taught me to add just enough cinnamon," she replied. Grandmother Ruth laughed softly. "And your great-grandmother taught me?" The thought pleased Lily, even in her sleepiness. It made the apples feel like part of a long story, passed from one pair of hands to another, from one kitchen to another, from one generation to the next. Grandmother Ruth looked at the family around the table and felt her heart become very still. There had been years when this room was louder, when children were smaller, when chairs scraped constantly, when someone always needed another spoon, or a wiped face, or a bandage on a knee. There had been years when money was counted carefully, and bread was stretched with prayerful hands. There had been years of laughter, years of tiredness, years of waiting, and years when she had not known exactly how tomorrow would look. Yet, again and again, the table had been set. Again and again, a meal had been shared. Again and again, God had given enough for the day. She did not speak these thoughts aloud at first. She simply watched. Grace sat with her shoulders slightly lowered now that the kitchen work was done. Thomas held his cup of warm milk in both hands, letting the heat rest against his fingers. Samuel ate slowly, still thinking about gardens and patience. Lily's eyelids drifted down between bites. The room was not perfect, and the family was not perfect, but there was peace here, a real peace, a quiet peace. The kind that grows when people learn to forgive small things, help one another, pray simply, and receive the evening as a gift. After a while, Samuel looked at the table and ran one finger along a small mark in the wood. "Grandmother," he asked, "why does the table have so many little lines?" Grandmother Ruth leaned forward slightly. "Because it has been used for many years," she said. "Each little mark has a story." Samuel's eyes grew curious. "What story is this one?" Grandmother Ruth followed his finger and smiled. "That one came from your father when he was young. He was trying to carve a little boat with a dull knife, though he had been told to wait for help." Thomas lowered his cup and gave a quiet laugh. "I remember that," he said. "I thought I knew exactly what I was doing," Grace smiled. "And did you?" "Not at all," Thomas admitted gently. Samuel grinned, and even Lily opened her eyes for a moment. Grandmother Ruth touched another faint mark. "This one came from a jar of blackberry jam that spilled one summer. We thought the stain would never fade. And this little round mark came from a teacup left too long near the window. This scratch came from moving the table when we made room for guests after church. And there, near the corner, is where your mother used to rest her pencil when she was learning to write letters." Grace looked down at the old mark and smiled softly, as if the table had returned a piece of childhood to her. "I had forgotten that," she said. "Tables remember many things," Grandmother Ruth said. "They remember work, meals, mistakes, celebrations, and prayers. They receive all of it quietly." Samuel looked at the table with new respect. "Does God remember all those things too?" "Yes," Grandmother Ruth said. "He remembers with love. He remembers the prayers spoken here. He remembers the tears wiped away here. He remembers the bread shared here. He remembers every time someone said sorry, every time someone forgave, every time someone gave the last piece to someone else. Nothing kind is forgotten by God." The room became quiet again. The thought seemed to settle warmly over each person. Grace looked at her children, then at her mother. There were evenings when she felt tired from caring for everyone, from preparing meals, washing dishes, keeping track of little needs, and trying to make the house feel peaceful, even when her own body wanted rest. But Grandmother Ruth's words helped her see the table differently. The work done here was not invisible. The small labors of love were not wasted. God saw them. God remembered. Thomas reached over and gently touched Grace's hand for a moment, not with dramatic feeling, but with quiet gratitude. Then he returned his hand to his cup. It was a small gesture, but Grandmother Ruth noticed. She always noticed such things. Love in a family often lived in quiet gestures. A cup poured before someone asked, a chair moved closer to the fire, a blanket placed over small shoulders, a patient answer given when the same question had been asked many times before. Lily, whose voice was now almost a whisper, asked, "Does God sit with us at the table?" Grandmother Ruth's eyes softened. "In a way, dear one, yes. Not in the same way we sit in chairs, but He is with us. His love is here. His care is here. When we give thanks, when we share, when we speak gently, when we forgive one another, we are remembering that this table belongs to Him too." Lily seemed comforted by that. She looked at the empty chair near the wall, then back at Grandmother Ruth, and smiled sleepily. Grandmother Ruth continued, "A family table is not only a place for food, it is a place where hearts are cared for. Sometimes a person comes to the table hungry for bread. Sometimes they come hungry for kindness. Sometimes they need someone to listen. Sometimes they need a peaceful silence. Sometimes they only need to know there is a place for them." Samuel looked at his little dish of apples. "Even if someone had a bad day?" "Especially then," Grandmother Ruth said. "A table can welcome a tired heart, and God welcomes tired hearts too." The fire made a soft, settling sound. Outside, the wind touched the window and passed on. Inside, the family stayed gathered, each one resting in the gentle words. Grandmother Ruth thought of the many Sunday evenings of her life. Some had been like this one, full of warmth and family. Others had been quieter, with fewer voices in the room. Some had carried sorrow. Some had carried joy, envelope. But every Sunday evening had taught her something about being held by God. She had learned that His care could be found in a crowded table and in an empty chair, in laughter and in silence, in abundance and in simple portions, in the beginning of life and in the silver-haired years of memory. She looked at Samuel and Lily and said, "When you grow older, you may sit at many tables. Some will be large, some small, some will be full of people, some very quiet. But wherever you are, remember to give thanks. A thankful heart can make even a simple meal feel like a gift. And when you share what you have, the table becomes warmer." Samuel nodded slowly. "I want our table to always be warm." Grace reached over and brushed his hair back gently. "Then we will help keep it that way," she said, "with kindness, with patience, and with prayer." Grandmother Ruth smiled. "Yes, and with forgiveness too. Every family needs forgiveness at the table." Samuel looked slightly concerned. "Even this family?" "Oh yes," Grandmother Ruth said softly. Every family. Sometimes people speak too quickly. Sometimes they forget to listen. Sometimes they become tired and impatient. But when love is gentle, it makes room to say, "I am sorry," and room to say, "I forgive you." That is one of the ways God keeps a home peaceful. Lily leaned against Grace now, too sleepy to sit upright much longer. Grace wrapped an arm around her and kissed the top of her head. "I forgive Samuel when he uses my blue crayon," Lily murmured. Samuel blinked. "I did not know I needed forgiving for that." Lily nodded very seriously. "You do." Everyone laughed softly, the kind of gentle laughter that does not break the peace but deepens it. Samuel smiled and said, "Then I am sorry for using the blue crayon." "I forgive you," Lily whispered, already half asleep. Grandmother Ruth's face shone with quiet joy. "There," she said, "even a blue crayon can teach forgiveness." The family laughed again, softly and warmly. Then the room settled. Grace gathered the little dishes from the table, but Grandmother Ruth lifted one hand. "Leave them for a moment, dear," she said. "They can wait." Grace paused, then smiled and sat back down. Sometimes rest was more important than finishing every task immediately. Sometimes a few dishes on a table were not a failure, but a sign that the family had eaten, shared, and stayed together a little longer. For a few peaceful minutes, no one did anything at all. They simply sat around the table. The lamp glowed, the fire warmed, the old wood held their hands and cups and small dishes. Samuel rested his head against his arm. Lily breathed softly against her mother's side. Thomas closed his eyes for a brief moment, not asleep, but deeply restful. Grace looked at the faces around her and seemed to let go of the last little hurry of the day. Grandmother Ruth silently thanked God for them. She thanked him for the daughter who had grown from a little girl into a gentle mother. She thanked him for Thomas, steady and kind. She thanked him for Samuel's thoughtful heart and Lily's tender spirit. She thanked him for the home, for the garden, for the food, for the warmth, for the little marks on the table, for the prayers that had been spoken there, and for the mercy that covered what was imperfect. She knew that family life was not always quiet like this. There were mornings with spilled water, afternoons with muddy shoes, evenings when someone was too tired to be cheerful, and days when patience wore thin. But she also knew that God did not wait for a family to become perfect before blessing them. He entered ordinary rooms. He blessed imperfect tables. He helped weary people begin again. His care did not depend on everything being neat, polished, or easy. It came gently, faithfully, day by day. At last, Thomas rose and carried Lily carefully in his arms. She did not protest. Her head rested against his shoulder, and the blanket trailed softly behind her. Grace gathered the cups and dishes, this time with Samuel helping sleepily beside her. Grandmother Ruth remained seated for a moment, watching them. The table slowly emptied. The bowls were taken away. The spoons were rinsed. The lamp was turned lower. The room became quieter still. Samuel returned to Grandmother Ruth before going to bed. "Grandmother," he said, "tomorrow, can we thank God for breakfast too?" Grandmother Ruth took his hand. "Yes, dear one. Breakfast is a very good place to begin." "And for the table?" "Yes, for the table." "And for the blue crayon?" Grandmother Ruth smiled. "Yes, Samuel, even for the blue crayon." He smiled back, satisfied, then followed his mother down the hall. Grandmother Ruth sat alone by the table for one final moment. The house was not empty, but it had become hushed. She placed her hand gently on the worn wood and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for this family beneath your care." The words were soft, simple, and enough. Outside, the stars shone quietly over the roof. The garden rested. The road beyond the house was still, and inside, the old family table stood in the warm dimness, holding the memory of supper, laughter, prayer, forgiveness, and love, small holy things, gathered gently under the faithful care of God. After Samuel followed his mother down the hallway, the sitting room became very still. The kind of stillness that comes after children have gone to bed is different from the stillness of an empty house. It is softer, fuller, and tender in its own quiet way. The little dishes had been washed and set to dry. The table had been wiped clean, though the warmth of supper still seemed to remain in the wood. The lamp had been lowered, and the fire in the hearth was no more than a deep red glow beneath the ash. Outside, the garden rested under the stars, and the night pressed gently against the windows without any coldness or fear. Everything felt held, as if the whole house had been folded carefully into the peaceful hands of God. Grandmother Ruth remained by the table for a while, her hand resting on the worn wooden surface. She listened to the soft sounds of the house settling. A floorboard gave a quiet creak down the hall. A door closed gently. Grace's voice murmured something low and loving to Lily. Thomas's footsteps moved carefully, probably placing Samuel's shoes beside the bed or pulling the blanket higher over his shoulders. Then, little by little, even those sounds faded. The children were being guided towards sleep, and the evening was becoming deeper and more hushed. Ruth looked around the room with a grateful heart. The chairs were slightly out of place. A small blue crayon lay near the edge of the table, forgotten after all the talk of forgiveness. A child's blanket still rested across the arm of her rocking chair. Near the hearth, the rug showed the gentle disorder of small feet, story-listening bodies, and a family that had gathered close. Some people might have looked at the room and seen only the remains of an ordinary evening. But Grandmother Ruth saw grace. She saw the kindness of God in the little marks of life left behind. She picked up the blue crayon and held it in her palm. It was worn down from use, the paper wrapper peeling slightly at one end. She smiled to herself, remembering Lily's sleepy declaration of forgiveness. A blue crayon was such a small thing, yet tonight it had become a little doorway into mercy. Ruth placed it carefully on the shelf near the children's drawings, then returned to her chair by the hearth. The old rocking chair welcomed her with its familiar shape. She lowered herself into it slowly, folded her hands over her lap, and let the gentle rhythm begin. Back and forth, softly, quietly, the chair moved. And as it moved, memories came. They did not arrive sharply. They came like candlelight, one glow after another. Ruth remembered Grace when she had been a child, small and bright-eyed, running through this same room with ribbons in her hair. She remembered Thomas as a young man, shy and respectful, sitting at the table for the first time and carefully answering every question asked of him. She remembered the day Samuel was born, when the house had seemed to hold its breath in joy. She remembered Lily as a baby, sleeping in a little basket near the hearth, while the family whispered around her so she would not wake. So many years had passed through this house. Some had been full and warm, some had been quiet and uncertain, some had carried laughter from room to room, some had asked for patience. Yet, as Ruth looked back, she saw one gentle thread running through them all, the faithful grace of God. Not always dramatic, not always easy to name in the moment, but present. Present in morning light, present in tired prayers, present in meals that were simple but enough, present in neighbors who stopped by at just the right time, present in strength for one more day when the day had felt long. She remembered one winter many years ago when Grace was still young. Snow had covered the road for days, and the garden fence had nearly disappeared beneath white drifts. The house had been colder than usual, and everyone had stayed close to the hearth. Ruth had made soup with what they had, stretching vegetables, barley, and herbs into meals that warmed the body and comforted the heart. There had not been abundance in the way some people think of abundance, but there had been enough. Enough wood for the fire, enough bread for the table, enough blankets for the beds, enough songs to keep the evenings gentle. Grace, still a little girl then, had sat near the window watching snow fall. "Will spring remember to come back?" she had asked. Ruth had smiled and sat beside her. "Yes," she had said, "spring is in God's keeping, just as winter is." At the time, it had been a simple answer for a child, but Ruth had carried the words in her own heart too. Seasons changed slowly. Some seemed to last longer than expected, but none of them were outside the care of the Lord. She remembered the first warm day after that winter, when the snow melted from the garden and tiny green shoots appeared near the fence. Grace had run outside with delight, pointing at every sign of life as if she had discovered treasure. Ruth could still hear her voice, "Mama, the garden remembered." And Ruth had thought, "No, dear one, the garden was remembered. Remembered by the one who sends light back to the earth in its season." The rocking chair moved gently beneath her. Ruth's eyes rested on the hearth, though she was not really seeing the room anymore. She was seeing years. She remembered seasons of work when the days began before sunrise and ended long after supper. There had been clothes to mend, bread to bake, floors to sweep, children to comfort, letters to write, and neighbors to help. At times, her hands had felt tired before the work was finished, yet often, in the middle of ordinary labor, Grace had met her quietly. A child would bring her a flower, a neighbor would leave fresh eggs at the door. Grace would sing to herself while setting cups on the table. A cool breeze would enter through the window just when the kitchen felt too warm. The Lord's kindness had not always removed the work, but it had often placed little lights along the way. She remembered a summer evening when Grace had been nearly Samuel's age. The sun had gone down slowly, leaving the fields bright and golden. Ruth had been folding linens by the window, and Grace had asked whether God ever grew tired of hearing the same prayers. Ruth had looked at her daughter, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask?" she had said. Grace had lowered her eyes and answered, "Because I ask him to help me be kind almost every day, and sometimes I still forget." Ruth had set the linen down and opened her arms. Grace had come to her, and Ruth had held her gently. "The Lord is not impatient with a growing child," she had whispered. "He is patient with us as we learn." Years later, Ruth smiled at the memory, because now Grace had become the mother saying patient things to her own children. Grace did not always see how much tenderness she had inherited, how much mercy had traveled through the family like a quiet river. But Ruth saw it, and she thanked God for it. The house was quieter now. From down the hall came the faint sound of Grace singing. It was not a full song, only a few soft lines of an old hymn, barely louder than breath. Ruth closed her eyes. She knew the hymn well. She had sung it to Grace when Grace was small. Her own mother had sung it before her, and perhaps, one day, Lily would hum it in another quiet room, not remembering exactly when she first learned it, only knowing that it made the heart feel safe. This thought filled Ruth with a gentle wonder. Faith did not always pass from one generation to the next through great speeches or perfect lessons. Often it passed through repeated little mercies, a prayer before bread, a hymn at bedtime, a soft answer after a mistake, a hand held during worry, a candle lit during a storm, a grandmother saying, again and again, "God is near, dear one." These small things gathered over time. They became part of the walls of a home. They became part of the way a child understood love. Ruth opened her eyes and reached for the folded blanket on the chair arm. It was the same knitted blanket Lily had used earlier, warm from the child's small body. Ruth smoothed it slowly across her lap. She had made it years ago, one row at a time, during quiet evenings much like this one. Some stitches were neater than others. A few places showed small imperfections, but the blanket had served its purpose well. It had warmed children, covered sleepy knees, softened winter nights, and rested across the shoulders of anyone who needed comfort. Ruth thought that a life of faith was sometimes like that blanket. Not flawless, but faithful, made row by row, prayer by prayer, kindness by kindness, day by day. She remembered her own grandmother then. The woman's face was not as clear in her mind as it once had been, but her hands remained vivid, strong, lined, gentle hands that smelled of soap, flour, and lavender. Those hands had taught Ruth how to knead bread, how to press seeds into soil, how to fold a cloth smoothly, and how to hold a Bible with reverence but not fear. Her grandmother had never made faith feel harsh. She had made it feel like coming home. When Ruth was anxious as a child, her grandmother would sit beside her and say, "Let us breathe slowly and remember who keeps us." Then they would sit in quiet until Ruth's heart became calm. Now, many years later, Ruth found herself speaking in the same gentle way to Samuel and Lily. She had become the old voice by the fire, the patient hands, the one who told stories slowly so little hearts could rest. The thought humbled her. She did not think of herself as wise in a grand way. She only had years behind her, and those years had taught her to notice God's goodness in places she once might have missed. Grace came back into the room quietly, carrying Lily's empty cup. Her face looked tired, but peaceful. "They are both nearly asleep," she whispered. Ruth smiled. "The stories helped?" "They always do," Grace said. She placed the cup near the basin, then came to sit in the chair across from her mother. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, shaped by years of love. Grace looked toward the hallway. "Samuel asked if the garden sleeps," she said softly. Ruth's eyes brightened. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him yes," Grace said. "And that God watches over seeds while they rest?" Ruth nodded. That was a very good answer. Grace looked down at her hands. "Sometimes I wonder whether I am giving them enough patience, enough faith, enough gentleness." Ruth's rocking slowed. She leaned forward a little, her voice very soft. "Dear Grace, children do not need a perfect mother. They need a loving one. They need a mother who returns to kindness, even after tired moments. They need prayers, warm meals, listening ears, and forgiveness. And they need to see you trusting God with what you cannot do perfectly." Grace's eyes grew tender. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," Ruth said gently, "but simple does not always mean easy. That is why grace is such a gift." Grace took a slow breath. The fire glowed softly between them. Ruth could see the little girl she once held and the grown woman she had become, both present in the same beloved face. She reached out, and Grace placed her hand in hers. "God has cared for this family through many days," Ruth said. "He cared for you when you were small. He cares for your children now. And He cares for you tonight, when you are tired." Grace closed her eyes for a moment, receiving the words. "I needed to hear that." "I know," Ruth whispered. "I need to hear it too." They sat together, mother and daughter, hand in hand, while the house rested around them. No great conversation was needed. Sometimes grace came through counsel, sometimes through silence, sometimes through the gentle reminder that even the one who comforts others is also held by God. After a while, Grace rose and kissed her mother's forehead. "Good night, Mama," she said softly. "Good night, dear heart," Ruth replied. Grace carried the cup away, then disappeared down the hall once more. Ruth listened until the house grew still again. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked toward the window. The stars were bright now, scattered across the deep night sky. The garden was hidden in shadow, but she knew it was there. The table was clean. The children were safe. Grace and Thomas were near. The house was quiet, and her heart was full of memories, not only of what had happened, but of how God had been present through it all. Grandmother Ruth folded her hands and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for all the years." She did not list them one by one. She did not need to. God knew. He knew the winters and springs, the laughter and tears, the work and rest, the prayers spoken clearly and the prayers breathed without words. He knew the young mother she had been, the grandmother she had become, and the peaceful night now resting over the family. The old clock ticked softly. The fire lowered further. Ruth's eyes grew heavy, but her spirit felt light. She had remembered enough. She had seen again the long, gentle faithfulness of God. And in the quiet room, surrounded by the warmth of family and the tenderness of many years, Grandmother Ruth rested in grace. Grandmother Ruth sat in the quiet room for a little while longer, letting the stillness gather around her like a soft shawl. The fire in the hearth had become only a small glow beneath the ash, and the lamp on the table burned low, warm and golden. The house was nearly asleep now. Down the hallway, the children's room was quiet. Grace and Thomas had lowered their voices to whispers. Outside, the garden rested under the stars, and the night lay gently over the roof, the windows, the trees, and the little path that led to the door. Ruth rose slowly from her rocking chair, steadying herself with one hand on the armrest. She folded the knitted blanket and placed it carefully over the back of the chair, where it would be waiting for another evening. Then she took the small lamp from the table and walked softly down the hallway. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, but only a little, as if the house itself knew that children were sleeping. The children's door was open just enough for a thin line of moonlight to enter. Ruth stepped inside quietly. Samuel lay beneath his blanket, one arm resting outside the covers, his face peaceful in sleep. Near the other side of the room, Lily was curled on her side, holding a small cloth rabbit close to her heart. Her hair had fallen across her forehead, and her breathing was slow and even. The window was partly covered by a curtain, but a gentle silver light slipped through and rested on the floor. Grandmother Ruth stood between their beds and looked at them with deep tenderness. Earlier, they had asked about bread, rain, blessings, patience, gardens, forgiveness, and God's care. Now their questions were resting too. Their little minds did not need more words tonight. Their hearts had been given enough. They had heard that God was kind. They had heard that small prayers mattered. They had heard that growing things take time. And now, like flowers in the garden, they were sleeping quietly beneath the care of the Lord. Ruth set the lamp on a small table and pulled Samuel's blanket a little higher over his shoulder. Then she crossed the room and gently brushed the hair from Lily's face. Lily stirred for a moment, but did not wake. Ruth smiled and whispered, "Sleep peacefully, little one." For a moment, she simply stood there in the quiet. She remembered Grace as a child, in a room much like this, breathing softly after long days of play and questions. She remembered her own grandmother standing near her bed when she was small, praying in a voice so low it seemed to become part of the night. And now, Ruth understood again that love often moved from one generation to another in very gentle ways. A blanket pulled higher, a forehead touched, a prayer spoken softly, a child reminded that they were safe. She bowed her head. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "thank you for these little ones. Thank you for Samuel's thoughtful heart and Lily's tender spirit. Thank you for their questions, their laughter, their small hands, their sleepy eyes, and the simple joy they bring into this home." The room remained still. The prayer moved softly through it, not heavy, not formal, but warm and peaceful. Please watch over them tonight. Let their sleep be calm and sweet. Let their dreams be gentle. Let their bodies rest, their minds grow quiet, and their hearts feel safe in your love. If they wake in the night, let them remember that they are not alone. If they feel afraid, surround them with your peace. If tomorrow brings lessons, play, small mistakes, or new questions, help them meet the day with patience and trust. Ruth paused and looked at the moonlit floor. Teach them to notice your kindness in ordinary things. In bread on the table, in rain on the garden, in flowers that bloom slowly, in family gathered close, in forgiveness after small troubles, in morning light, warm blankets, kind words, and peaceful evenings. Let their faith grow gently, like seeds in good soil. Her voice became even softer. And Lord, bless Grace and Thomas as they care for this home. Give them strength when they are tired, wisdom when they are unsure, and tenderness when the day feels long. Help them remember that they do not need to be perfect to be loved by you. Let this house be filled with patience, gratitude, laughter, forgiveness, and rest. Samuel turned slightly in his sleep, then settled again. Lily's small hand relaxed around the cloth rabbit. Ruth waited until the room was completely still once more. "Thank you for carrying our family through another day," she whispered. "Thank you for the years behind us and the morning still to come. Keep us close through the night. Hold every heart in this house in your gentle care. Amen." She lifted her head slowly. The prayer seemed to remain in the room like a soft light. Ruth felt no need to say more. God had heard the words, and he had also heard the love beneath them. She turned down the lamp until only a very small glow remained, then stepped back into the hallway. Grace stood there quietly, her robe wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes tender. She had heard the last part of the prayer. "Thank you, Mama," Grace whispered. Ruth reached out and touched her daughter's cheek, just as she had done when Grace was young. "They are in God's hands," she said softly, "and so are you." Grace closed her eyes for a moment and nodded. The words seemed to help her lay down the last little worries of the day. Then she kissed her mother's hand and returned to her room. Grandmother Ruth walked back to the sitting room. The old table stood quiet in the dim light. The blue crayon rested on the shelf. The chairs were still. The cross on the wall was touched by a thin line of moonlight. Ruth lowered the lamp a little more, checked the hearth one final time, and then stood in the center of the room with a peaceful heart. The day was finished. The stories had been told. The children were sleeping. The family was safe. And God was near. Ruth whispered one last thank you, so soft that only the Lord could hear it. Then she made her way to her own room, moving slowly, gratefully, and calmly. Outside, the garden slept beneath the stars. The seeds were hidden in the soil. The flowers were closed for the night. The trees stood quietly in the cool air. Everything rested in its proper time. And inside the little house, Grandmother Ruth lay down beneath her quilt, her hands folded lightly over her heart. She did not need to carry tomorrow yet. Tomorrow would come with its own light, its own bread, its own questions, and its own mercies. Tonight was for rest. She breathed in slowly, then she breathed out. Her thoughts became quiet. Her body softened into the bed. Her heart rested in the gentle faith that had carried her through many years and would carry the children after her. The house grew still. The stars shone softly. And over the sleeping family, the peace of God remained, gentle, faithful, and near enough for the night.